It's your boy, the one and only Sir Patrick, the Department of Biology. Welcome to Lecture 7. And for Lecture 7, we're going to talk about your chlorophytes.
So today, we're going to discuss your division Chlorophyta, or your chlorophytes, your green algae. So before we move to that, let's first have the outline of our lecture for today. For our outline, we'll have first the overview of your group, then we'll move on to the basic cellular structure, then to the modes of movement of your chlorophytes, then to the modes of reproduction. Then we'll dwell a little bit more on the pylogeny and classification of your green algae, and then we'll finish off with the parade of taxa, giving rise to the different groups, particularly to the UCT or core chlorophytes of your the division Chlorophyta. So let's first go to the overview of your chlorophytes with the basis of classification of the group. First and foremost, for your chlorophytes, the most defining characteristic that we can give to them is the presence of your chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, since they are the only group that has chlorophyll B, most of them. Then, in terms of your chloroplasts, as you remember, your Chlorophyta, your division Chlorophyta, belongs to group 2, meaning they have a chloroplast. No? Their chloroplast doesn't have any chloroplast ER, so they are group 2 in terms of their chloroplast morphology. In terms of the storage product that they have inside their chloroplast, it is made up mostly of starch, which is most probably in close association with your pyronoid bodies. Now, in terms of the diversity of your chlorophytes, most of them, 90% of them, are freshwater or can be found in freshwater habitats. So this includes predominantly your Eulotrichales and most Odogoniales and Zygnematales, which are exclusively living in freshwater habitats. And these freshwater representatives of your chlorophytes exhibit what we call cosmopolitan distribution, meaning you can see it almost everywhere. Okay? So probably the freshwater species that you can see here in the Philippines can also be seen in the United States or in Africa, for example, or for the most part of the globe. And your marine species, as you can see here, your marine species include predominantly your Caulerpales, your Dasycladales, and your Siphonocladales. Most of these are in tropical distribution, but some can also be found in marine distribution. And if you track their endemicity, most organisms that are present in your, for example, in your polar or your colder marine regions, they are most probably endemic to that part. So, endemic. So, kind of think of it as these cold marine representative taxa are trapped in those colder regions, and they have no way of penetrating the tropical regions of your marine environment. So yeah, they kind of are endemic to that certain strip of the globe. Okay, so moving on with your forms and adaptation of the group, we have a remarkable variation in terms of morphology and ecology. There are unicellular species like your Ostreococcus tauri to large multicellular forms like your Cladophora, your Ulva lactuca, and those representative that are really big, They can, as you can see in the first slide that we have, these can cover entire freshwater habitat, covering the entire. Well, I don't know if that's a form of algal bloom, but yeah, the man in the first slide is swimming in algae, in green algae. So, in terms of habitat, they can be found in freshwater to marine, in your littoral areas, in the open ocean, and even in the deep seas. They can be found. There are species or groups that are exclusively terrestrial, like your Trente polyales. You can see it here in Baguio too. There are representatives here, yung mga color orange in trees, in Baguio. So there are also representative that lives in extreme environment, and also those representative that are in close association with human excrement that can also cause certain what we call parasitic mode of nutrition, like for example your Prototika that is also a chlorophyte. It's also a part of your division Chlorophyta, but eventually they lost their ability to photosynthesize. They lost their chloroplast and adopted this parasitic way of life. In terms of symbiosis, your chlorophyte, a famous example would be your Tribuxopiceae, which form symbiotic relationship with your, for example, siya yung pycobiont in your lichens. So yeah, they form close association with fungal species to form your lichen that can be found on top of trees, for example. So that's your lichen, and other form of both intracellular and extracellular symbiosis. So yeah, they are quite remarkable in that sense. So, moving on with our lecture, let's go to the second portion. Yeah. So, as you can see here, we have your Prototika wickerhamii, which causes the disease prototicosis. So, yeah, this one right here causes prototicosis, or certain inflammation and rashes in certain regions of the world. So, yeah, this is a representative of your Chlorophyta that lost its chloroplast and eventually adapted a parasitic mode of nutrition. So yeah, those are your Prototika. And we also have your Trentipolia aurea. So these this is the one that I was talking about. You can see it here in Baguio, the yellowish tinge or orange tinge algae that you can see creeping in your trees. So if you go to UPB campuses, for example, in the post in Court A. So if you go to Court A, we have a post of your synthetic man-made post, UP something. I forgot what is in that signage, but yeah, if you, I don't know if it's still there, but last time that I checked, there are still these orange patches in your in those posts, concrete posts. But those are your Trentipolia or other species of your Trentipol, other species of Trentipolia that is endemic here in UP, in the Philippines. So yeah, very orange due to your carotenoids and xanthophylls that can be present in the chloroplast of these species. Okay, so that's your Trentipolia and Prototika, interesting representative of your chlorophytes. And we also have your basic cellular structure. Now, in terms of basic cellular structure, let's first go to your cell wall. So again, it's cell wall in terms of fibrillar component. In terms of fibrillar component, we have your cellulose. We have also silans and mannans in most Caularpales. We also have glycoprotein in your volvocales. And In more primitive forms, we have what we call extracellular scales. So these scales for your Prasinophyceae group, we have scale-like patterns right here, overlapping scale pattern that covers that is part of the cell wall of this group. So as you can see here, there are overlapping scales in your Prasinophyceae group right here. Don't mind the arrows. So yeah, and in terms of fibrillar component, we have your cellulose, we have silans and mannans, and in terms of amorphous component, we have for this group we also have your alginic acid. If you recall from our previous lecture, alginic acid. Yan naman yung amorphous. 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 God damn. Oh. Kaya ko to. Tiwala. Yay! Alginic acid. So that's your cell wall. In terms of the chloroplast diversity, in terms of the structure of the chloroplast, we have two chloroplast membrane. Again, this your Chlorophyta belongs to group 2 in terms of chloroplast structure, and they have 3 to 5 thylakoids that are grouped into those lamellae that we mentioned earlier. So we also have your pyrenoid and your starch. So as you can see here, this is the pyrenoid right here. That's your pyrenoid. These globules right here are your starch globules. So pyrenoid, those are your starch globules. Maybe some fat lipid globules along the way. And this is your eyespot right here. So yeah, that's your eyespot, or what we call your stigma, aka the stigma. Your stigma, again, as you remember earlier in our discussion, in the earlier lectures that we had, your stigma is composed of your lipid, oh my god, please stop. Oh man, ba't nagiging... Okay, let's imagine that is a P. Lipid, again, we have lipid globules. We have lipid globules. So we have lipid globules. Oh man. So we have lipid globules plus the photoreceptor. I hate this. Photoreceptor. So yeah, so your eyespot or your stigma, aka the stigma, is composed of your lipid globules plus your photoreceptor. Minsan kalimitan, di ba? Your photoreceptor is of the rhodopsin molecule or some other forms of your rhodopsin molecules. But yeah, those are your stigma, your pyrenoid, and the starch molecules inside your chloroplast. Again, in terms of structure, that is what we can see in your chlorophytes. In terms of photosynthetic pigment, as I mentioned earlier, we have chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B in your representative. We also have carotenoid, different forms of carotenoid, like lutein, xanthophyls. This is also a xanthophyll, your cyponoxanthine, which is mostly found in your cyponaceous genera. Later on, we'll discuss what we mean when we say cyponaceous genera or cyponaceous in general. We also have hematochrome. When we say hematochrome, these are a collective term, no? Collective term for your carotines and astaxanthines. Okay, your another observation that scientists saw when involving your chlorophyte group, we have a higher carotenoid concentration. Okay, higher pigmentation of carotenoid, especially when there is a limiting nitrogen in the environment, and there is a very high irradiance, or very high. When we say irradiance, we're talking about high sunlight. So when there's high sunlight, low nitrogen concentration, and high salinity, usually what our scientists can observe is an increased production of these carotenoid pigments, this carotenoid concentration inside your chloroplast, inside the cell. So in terms of the contractile vacuole, we have what we call a pulsating vacuole. And these are found in most Volvocales group, in most Volvocine group. So yeah, we have your pulsating vacuole. What does this vacuole do, or your contractile vacuole? The main function of this is again for osmoregulation. Imagine your paramecium, diba? We have paramecium, but this time this is in paramecium or in amoeba. I forgot, but this time it can also be found in this representative of your Chlorophyta. And what this does is it expel water, no, to maintain osmoregulation, to maintain osmolarity inside the cell. So basically, main function is for osmoregulation, to maintain water and solute balance. So what it does, that pulsating vacuole will collect water molecule, and it will expel that water molecule outside. Ang galing, na-expel siya. Inside out. So it's like a beating heart, but it's a vacuole. So for biflagellated organism, usually you can find two contractile vacuole that is constantly pumping out water molecules outside the cell to maintain that osmolarity. So in terms of flagellum naman, we have an isoconts. Most representative have what we call isoconts, meaning, again, if you remember, these organisms have what we call the whiplash flagella or whiplash flagellum. Para siyang whiplash, para siyang whip. Yeah. Indiana Jones lagi naisip ko kasi. Anyway, so that's your whiplash flagella. These whiplash flagella or whiplash flagellum is usually supported by what we call your kinetosome molecule or your basal body. God dang it, basal body. So basal body. So this basal body is essentially the connection. So you can see here, these are the connection of your flagellum. So this is the flagellum right here. So your basal body somehow connects or your kinetosome connects the flagellum. If it has two flagella, it will connect that flagella to your cell, to your to the body of the cell. Okay. So your kinetosome can either be what we call your microtubular roots or your contractile rhizoblast or the fibrous root. So you can see here it is glowing or it is fluorescing under a certain type of microscope. So it is really embedded to the body of your to the body of the cell, to the cell body. What I mean. So yeah, so that is your two flagella here. I don't know if this is a chlamydomonas, but it seems like it. Again, the function of these are for locomotion in general, for locomotion. But your microtubular roots, these are this portion. This is your microtubular roots. This is your rhizoblast right here. Okay, so your microtubular roots connects the entire thing to the cell, as you can see here. So it also is involved in locomotion. But your contractile rhizoblast or your fibrous roots, as you can see here, connects your outer flagella. It serves as a connection of your outer flagella to the nucleus of the cell right here. So they can have an intimate connection with each other. So it serves more of a control, or connection to the nucleus. That's your contractile rhizoblast. The fibrous root, the microtubular roots are here, and here. These two here. Okay, so that's that. Now we'll move on to the modes of movement of your chlorophytes. We only have two topics here, the types of movement and the Eyespot. So in terms of the types of movement, we only have two: phototactic or the geotactic movement. When we say phototactic, it is a response to light, and geotactic is more or less response to gravity. And usually, in terms of phototactic movement, your organism can either produce a response in terms of beating its flagella or secrete mucilage. So usually we have a positive or negative phototactic movement. Negative phototactic. When we say positive phototactic, usually it moves photophilic, it moves towards the light. Again, most of them are photosynthetic, but some, in certain cases, then they can exhibit, certain representative can exhibit negative phototactic movement, or what we call photophobic movement. And this is when, for example, your organism is experiencing high degree of irradiance, so it tries to move away from the light, or generally is present in the benthic area of your benthic habitat, for example, in the sediment. So it will usually exhibit that negative phototactic or your photophobic behavior. So they can achieve this movement or locomotion through the beating of their flagella. So it's just like they're swimming using their flagella. Sometimes they can also use mucilage that will they will secrete this mucilage to enable them to swim a little bit faster, to aid in swimming or attachment to other benthic strata or certain littoral areas or your rocks, for example. But in terms of geotactic movement, we only have negative geotaxis, meaning it always is, the organism will always try to go up. So that is achieved through swimming or through the beating of your flagella. Okay, moving on to your Eyespot. So we also have the Eyespot. Again, remember we have, this is the Eyespots right here, located right there. So again, your Eyespot, aka your stigma, is usually involved in the reception. So it serves as an eye, essentially. So yeah, it is usually exhibited by different flagellated flagellated cells, and it is usually located within the anterior portion within your chloroplast. Okay, so that's your eye spot right there. In terms of composition, I already told you what it is usually composed of. We have your lipid droplets. So we have lipid droplets there, certain pigments, and your photoreceptors. So lipid droplets, certain pigments, plus your photoreceptors. So the purpose of your lipid droplets is usually to capture light and to bounce it off towards the photoreceptor. And your photoreceptor, if you remember earlier, or in our, your photoreceptor is usually composed of, oh man, photoreceptor. So your photoreceptor, I don't know how to turn this off, but adjust na lang kayo. So you have your photoreceptor. Again, your photoreceptor usually is made up of your pigment. So it's made up of your pigment plus what we call the other portion, the protein portion, or the apoprotein portion. Apoprotein. Apo. Okay, apoprotein. So apoprotein plus the pigment that makes up your photoreceptor. So again, the composition of your eye spot or your stigma is made up of your lipid droplets that is responsible for bouncing off light towards your photoreceptor. Your photoreceptor is usually made up of your pigment plus your apoprotein molecule. And this is usually what we call your rhodopsin. So that's your rhodopsin molecule. Okay. So in general, the general mechanism of your the general action that is performed by your Eyespot is, imagine you have your light source here, that's the sun, more or less, or a UV lamp or something, or a lamp, no? Any lamp, a halogen bulb or fluorescent. Anyway, so what usually happens is your source of light, usually the range of the wavelength of light that is used is at the 500 nanometer wavelength. So the sun or any light source will give off that certain light. And your organism right here, for example, imagine this as your chlamydomonas or any organism, has your chloroplast right there. It has a flagella, has two flagella. It has your rhodopsin molecule, and we also have your lipid droplets or your lipid globules right near here. So what will happen is your lipid droplet will try to, well, it will try to capture or bounce off those 500 nanometer wavelength of your light towards your, so it will capture that and it will bounce it off towards your rhodopsin molecule, or in this case it's not your rhodopsin, it's a chlamydopsin, because we're talking about your chlamydomonas, although it's not really perfect drawing, it's elongated. I just want to show you it's chloroplast, that's why I made it look like that. But your chlamydomonas is usually more oval to circular in shape. Yep. Anyway, so we have your lipid droplet that will capture and bounce off certain wavelength of light towards your rhodopsin molecule, or in this case, chlamydopsin molecule. And what will your rhodopsin will do, the receptor will do, your rhodopsin, so what will it do is it will send a signal to your cell membrane. So it will send signal to your cell membrane. So cell membrane. Yeah. Anyway, so cell membrane. So it will send signal to your cell membrane, and there will be changes in certain cellular conformation. And after that changes in cellular conformation, calcium channels will open. So again, when we say when there's a calcium channel that opens, usually magpa-flood si calcium inside, and there will be a release of ATP. After the release of ATP, so diba, may calcium ions tayo. But yeah, 2 plus ata to. Calcium ions, and then mag-release ng ATP. God! ATP. Again, after the release of ATP, your dynein arm that is near your flagella. So your dynein arm will be the one that is responsible for the generation of your movement. ATP, dynein, movement. Move. Kailangan ata isasyal ko yung sulat or mas mukhang tao yung sulat. So yeah. So the general mechanism of action, the wavelength of light will be captured by your by the photoreceptor, or essentially by the photoreceptor and some lipid droplets. Your lipid droplet will aid in the bouncing off of certain wavelength of light towards the photoreceptor 2. So it kind of acts as somehow a magnifying glass or a mirror, since it's a lipid droplet. And your photoreceptor, your rhodopsin / chlamydopsin, will send signal to your cell membrane. Your cell membrane will change its conformation. It will undergo certain changes in conformation. And what will happen after that is calcium channels will open, and there will be an influx of calcium inside. And after the influx of calcium, there will be a release of ATP. And again, this ATP molecule is needed for the movement of your dynein arm, of your flagella. And after the movement of your dynein arm, essentially your flagella will move. Yeah, beating of your flagella. So yeah, it's a very interesting portion of your of of science, essentially, because if you remember, calcium ions in muscles is we all discuss the mechanism of action in your, for example, in your bio 100. We all talked about the the importance of calcium ion in the contraction of your sarcomere, the muscle units in your muscle fiber cells. Yeah, sarcomere. But yeah, there's a need for your calcium ions in your muscle cells or in certain groups then of your algae. Essentially, what I want you to remember in your recall in your Bio 100 class is there's this mechanism of calcium, release of calcium ions. No? When we usually allow calcium ions into the cells, these causes the structural, your sarcomeres, for example, to dramatically and rapidly change shape. That's also true for certain vorticelian species that has this spring. Diba? Yung mga vorticella natin, para siyang, oh, man. So, yung mga vorticella natin, imagine nyo para siyang ganyan. Tapos, usually may spring yan, no? Spring-loaded. Tapos, nag-extend yan or nag-contract. Depende sa influx of calcium. Yeah. So, ganun din sa mga muscle fibers natin, di ba? Yung mga muscle fiber natin, oh wow. Yung mga muscle fiber natin, ha? Wow, nakakainis naman. Ayan. So, meron kang alternating dark white, white meat, dark meat ng, ng turkey. Anyway, joke lang yan. Walang ganun. Hindi turkey to. But yeah, may ganun din, no? May repeating dark white, red, or dark white, yeah. Na portion yung muscle. But anyway, when does your cell allow calcium ions to enter, when calcium ion influx towards the cell, there's a change. What am I saying is there's a change or dramatic, rapid change in shape of your cell, or the muscle fiber cell. Or in case of Vorticella, change in the length of its stalk, this flower stalk. But in order for your, for example, in order for the contraction process to return to its original shape, this same calcium ion that was released and that was influxed inside the cells has to be slowly and carefully pumped out of your cytoplasm, or of that certain region of your muscle, for example. So yeah, across our biology, so calcium ion, if you think about it, these calcium ions are used across all of our biological contraction mechanism. Or if in all of biology, pag sinabi mong calcium ion, usually importante si calcium ion for kahit dun sa vesicle, di ba? Pag-release ng vesicle sa mga neurotransmitter, sa mga natin, yung mga terminals, no? Yung terminal ng ating mga nerve endings. Importante din si calcium ion doon. Yeah, in most biological mechanism, calcium ion serves as a carrier of information and is usually is needed, no, to change certain structure in all biological system, not just in plants, not just in us humans, and also in animals. Yeah, calcium is very important in that sense as a carrier of information, including the one that is inside you, diba? Yung mga muscles mo, pati yung mga neurotransmitters mo ng brain mo. But this reliance on calcium ion is kind of strange if you think about it. It's very strange, but it's also very common. It's very strange, but it's very common in all biological systems. And the evolution of this system that relies in calcium is a little weird if you think about it, because calcium ion can also interfere with most biological reactions that we have that are very important in our cellular metabolism. When there's calcium ion that interacts with our normal cellular metabolism, it can go haywire. But yeah, we still use calcium in sending this information in our cells, in your vorticellia, for example, and in this calcium in your flagella, diba? And one recent theory suggests that these rapid calcium-driven responses that we are looking right now are part of a much longer evolutionary arc. So it's part of this longer evolutionary arc theory or story, one that is built on the need for ancient cells to repair damage to their membranes in order to prevent influx of calcium ions from the surrounding. Yeah, your in ancient times, your cell need to prevent the influx of calcium ions inside them because it can interfere with their key metabolic pathways. So this same, no, this same urgency that evolved in ancient time back then, that could have driven the same urgency that driven the evolution of this first aid kit for your calcium ions might have been used for this, or rewired and used for this contraction here, this rapid contraction here, this movement of your flagellum too. No? So Mother Nature, if you think about it, Mother Nature somehow converted that once defense against this calcium chemical to interfere with our cellular metabolism into a useful signaling mechanism that drives everything from your contraction processes to the release of neurotransmitter to either any other signaling pathways to sending of action potentials that help you in a way move and also sense the world around you. So that's your calcium. Yeah, very interesting calcium. Naalala ko lang kasi si calcium na naman nandito. So yeah, very profound yung calcium mechanism na yan sa atin. Anyway, we'll move on to your modes of reproduction. Daming kwento dun ni Sir. Mode of reproduction, meron na tayong dalawa. We have your asexual and sexual reproduction. Okay, so in terms of asexual reproduction, we have what we call fragmentation. So ito yung nasisira lang, yung isang filament, and then dadami na sila. We also have autocolony formation, which is usually exhibited by your synovial organisms. We also have your spore formation. This is usually accompanied by what we call zoosporogenesis, which also includes the production of your sporangium, sporangium, the housing of the spore. Anyway, in terms of cellular sexual reproduction, we have your isogamous individuals. We also have anisogamous and oogamous with the gametangium right there. We also produce different representative also produce zoogametes in most chlorophytes, for example. They also exhibit aplanogametes or your amoeboid gametes in terms of your zygonematales. They also undergo gametogenesis usually, and what we call the mating type reaction or your agglutinative flagellar adhesion in most isogametes, in your flagellated gametes, for example. So this agglutinative flagellar adhesion, imagine we have, sabihin natin, this is a positive and this is a negative, and they both have flagella. They're flagellated. Ayan, imagine niyo na. So usually these are haploid, right? Haploid. So these are haploid organisms, or haploid representatives. And usually you have a positive and a negative different mating type here. And what will happen is these two, your positive and negative different mating type, will fuse its flagella. It will fuse its flagella together with each other. So mag-interact yung mga flagella nila yung agglutinative flagella, flagellar adhesion. Their flagella will kind of fuse together, and eventually their anterior portion will fuse and go contact with each other. So imagine niyo sila pa rin to, but their anterior portion will kind of go towards each other, and eventually after the fusion of your anterior and your posterior portion, diba? That's your plasmogamy, and then what will happen next is your karyogamy, which means the fusion of your nuclei to form your diploid. So pag nag-fuse na yung nuclei nila, it will form now your diploid organism. God. Diploid. Ang liit na asin, kaya hindi na siya makasulat. Diploid organism. So yeah, those are your agglutinative flagellar adhesion. But yeah, we also discussed that. Now, we'll dwell with what we call your pylogeny, and we'll need to have a grounding on this because it's very important in terms of your Chlorophyta. No? So we are going to discuss the pylogeny and classification of your green algae. Now, I want you to first take a deep breath and look at this right here. Look at this grouping right here. That's a very granulated picture, but don't you worry, everything is clear naman. We have your Chlorophyta right here, and we also have your Streptophyta. Now, this is part your chlorophyte, and if you remember earlier in our discussion on the pylogeny of your entire plastid-containing organisms, we discussed that your chlorophytes, your charophytes, are enclosed relatively. No? They are very closely related to your land plants. That's why I don't, again, ito yung sinasabi ko, I don't blame someone for lumping in together this group of organism into what we call plants. No, we'll not sue them for doing that because yeah, they are essentially part of your Viridiplantae or your kingdom Chlorobionta, your plants. Yeah, Viridiplantae. But I want you to look at here is first we have your prasinophytes. Your prasinophytes right here. So these are your organism right here. Those are your prasinophytes. These prasinophytes are the more primitive ones that are also part of your Chlorophyta group. So your prasinophytes is a in terms of evolutionary divergence, they are the first one that diverge from the group. So as you can see here, they are the first one that diverge from your chlorophyte group, but they still belong to your chlorophytes. But yeah, they are the first one that diverge, and in that sense too, they are the more primitive one. They have this most primitive characteristic, and usually most of them have this flagella. No, they are flagellated. Yeah. So your prasinophytes is usually termed as the origin of your ancestral green flagellates. So that's your prasinophytes, the more primitive one. And we also have what we call the core chlorophytes right here. The core chlorophyte group, including your UCT, your Ulbophyceae, your Chlorophyceae, and your Tuboxiophyceae. So that's your core chlorophyte group. So your Chlorophyta is essentially made up of your core chlorophytes, the UCT, plus your prasinophytes. Okay? Now your Chlorodendrophyceae, just forget them for now because medyo transitional pa rin yung ano nila, position. Anyway, so moving on to the next part of this is your, although they don't belong to your chlorophytes, let's just say that first of all, but I want you to also remember them here because your charophytes is of evolutionarily important lineage too, because they are thought to be the transition of your algae, so they are still algae, to your land plants. So they bear a very close semblance to your land plants. So that's why they are very closely related to your land plants right there. So yeah, your charophytes are still algae, but they are not chlorophytes. Let me tell you that. Your charophytes are part of what we call your Streptophyta. And your Streptophyta does not only include your charophytes, but also include your land plants. So they're very closely related to each other. Because your charophytes, in terms of yung first mga specimens na pinakita talaga sa amin, for example, sa Botany 119, mga charophytes talaga yung unang pinakita, di ba? Kung maalala nyo pa sa Botany 119 nyo, yun yung pinakita sa amin na mga representatives. Mga charophytes talaga. Parang nag-evolutionary ladder kami doon sa pagtingin namin sa anatomy of the land plants. We were first fed with the charophytes representatives, which are algae, and then we moved on to the different, to the higher land plants that we know of. Kasi, although mas primitive yung itsura ng mga charophytes, ito yung pinakalagi namin tinitingnan, this one. Yan. Yung itsura nila, kapag sinearch nyo sa internet, ganyan yung mga itsura. Para siyang, paano ba to? Para siyang halaman na din eh. But yeah, yan yung mga charophytes na nakikita natin sa mga aquatic na lugar. And then, land plants later on. May mga para din silang parang anterid, para din silang may flower. Para silang flowering algae. Meron silang anteridia, mga ganyan. Nagpo-produce din yung ibang mga extinct relatives nila ng mga pollen, for example, ng sporopollenin. Nakita nila sa mga fossil records na nagpo-produce sila niyan. So yeah, a very good transitional organism. But yeah, again, I want you to know this now. I just want to say this now, that your chlorophyte is different from your charophyte. Okay? But kasi later on, makikita nyo, sinasama ko lagi si charophyte. No? Laging kasama si charophyte sa mga discussion mamaya sa mga defining characteristics nila. Okay. So yeah, again, we have your core UCT group right here, your core chlorophytes, and we have this is also your chlorophyte right here. So that's your entire chlorophyte, your core chlorophyte here, plus your prasinophytes right here. So that makes up your entire division Chlorophyta. Then we have your charophyte lineage right here that is very close, really related to your embryophytes or your land plants right here. Okay. Ayan. So as you can see here too, ayan din, breakdown lang ulit. We have your prasinophytes plus your core chlorophytes, that is your UCT group, your Ulvophyceae, your Chlorophyceae, and your Trabucophyceae. So these two will form your Chlorophyta group, and your charophyte, meron tayo dyang land plants right here, as you can see here, embryophytes or your land plants right there. So these naman forms your Streptophyta, your charophytes plus your embryophytes or your land plants. So again, they are different from each other, but let's mix them together, shall we? Okay, so your kingdom Chlorobionta or your Viridiplantae has these divisions. Your division Chlorophyta and your division Streptophyta. Again, nabanggit natin, we have your Prasinophyta and the core chlorophytes. Core chlorophyte group, your UCT group. And then in terms of your Streptophyta, we have your Charophyceae and your Embryophyceae. Ito na yung land plants and your charophytes. Okay, so let's see what they look like. Isa-isahin natin. Moving on with your parade of taxa. So in terms of parade of taxa, unahin muna natin yung basis of classification. Then we'll move on to the characteristics of the major groups and their representatives. So isa-isahin natin sila dyan. In terms of the basis of classification, we have at least, I think, 11 basis of classification. We'll start with your positioning of your flagella. The main difference is your charophytes have a lateral. So it's found in the lateral portion, yung flagella nila, while your Chlorophyceae and Ulvophyceae in the anterior portion mo naman makikita sa case ito ng mesostigma, for example. Yeah, I think. And dun sa case ng mga tawag dito, Chlamydomonas, no? Okay, in terms of eyespot, your charophytes usually have no eyespot, or your, ayan, makikita nyo sa arrow na to, yung stigma, kulay reddish to orange. But in your Chlorophyceae and Ulvophyceae, they are very common. They're very common. In terms of the presence of your what we call microtubular roots, I mentioned this earlier, your microtubular roots, these are the ones that supports the flagella, di ba? So, yan yung makikita mo nandito. But, in terms of your microtubular roots, yung mga charophyceae natin, they have this what we call large band with smaller band. So, merong maliit na band here and a fused large band right here that supports the flagella. But in your UCT group, pag sinabi natin UCT, that's your Ulvophyceae, Chlorophyceae, and Trabucophyceae group. Usually, they have this apat na microtubular roots. And these are usually arranged in parang, pag sinabi natin cruciately arranged, para siyang cross, ba? Kinrucify si Jesu Cristo. Yeah, cross-like yung pattern. Yeah, pag nasa most top view siguro makikita mong cross yan. But meron kang arrangement of this na may tinatawag tayong certain arrangement, yung tinatawag nating X2 arrangement. X2 arrangement. So pag sinabi na pag may X usually, 'di ba? Yan yung mga variable number of arrangement. For example, sa Chlamydomonas for example, so Chlamydomonas, lagyan na lang natin C para hindi na tayo magtagal. Si Chlamydomonas meron siyang 4, 2, 4, 2 na arrangement ng ng microtubular roots niya. So, mas maapal syempre yung 4 kaysa sa 2. Meron din naman tayo, for example, sa ating mga Elotrix, for example, meron kang ang arrangement naman nila, di ba? 5, 2, 5, 2, 5, 2. Okay? So, yan. Nag-iiba-iba yung arrangement mo. But these are usually 4 microtubular roots that are arranged in cross-like patterns. So, Elotrix, siguro na-encounter nyo na yan earlier. Si Chlamydomonas naman yung isa. Now, in terms of your Rhizoblast, yung ating mga Chlorophyceae, yung ating mga Charophyceae, they don't have your Rhizoblast. Ito yung, di ba kung maalala nyo, ito yung naka-attach near your nucleus. Di ba? Part din siya ng basal body natin. So, we have your rhizoblast. Sa mga Chlorophyceae, wala silang rhizoblast. But for example, in Prasinophyceae and Ulvophyceae and your Chlorophyceae, na pinaka-common, yung mga rhizoblast na to. So, those are the deeper ones that is embedded or in close contact with your nucleus. Now, in terms of your MLS or your multi-layered structures, These in your charophytes, it is usually present. In your prashinophytes, it's the presence is still debatable, but in your chlorophyceae and ulvophyceae, it is essentially absent. Okay, so what is the MLS or this multi-layered structure? Ano nga ba itong mga to? So, so you can see here, this is the MLS system, the MLS structure, the multi-layered structure. Usually, this is composed of your 4 layers of microtubules that is found in your kinetosome. 4 layers of microtubules. Micro. Four layers of microtubules. This is found in association to your kinetosome and also in association to your flagella. So, ayun siya. So, ito yung flagella mo. Ayun yung mga MLS system natin. So, yeah, they are in close association with your flagella. So, again, dahil close in association with flagella, they are involved or they aid for locomotion of your organism. And usually, the first layer of your, so apat na layers yan. The first layer here, right here, the first layer that is close, very close to your, diba, ayan, sa cell membrane mo, sa plasma lemma mo, this is usually the biggest and the largest. So, but yeah, the entire function of this MLS structure right here, the ML structure, is for locomotion. In terms of the manner of cell division, you can always compare them in terms of the first one that you need to discuss is the persistence or absence of your spindle fiber. The next one is the origin or formation of your cell wall. So in terms of formation of your spindle fiber, your charophyceae has a very persistent spindle fiber. Your ulvophyceae also has a persistent spindle, but in your chlorophyceae, the spindle fiber usually collapses. In terms of the origin of the cell wall, for the case of your charophyceae, we have what we call your pragmoplast. So, ano nga bang, kung maaalala nyo sa inyong Botany 119 classes nyo, di ba, diniscuss naman sana na-discuss yung formation of your cell wall, no? Cell wall. So sa case ng mga charophytes mo, may parang in close na close siya, no? Kamukha niya yung sa land plants din. But ang mangyayari doon, 'di ba, kung maalala nyo, in the cell, 'di ba, nag-divide na yung cell, na pull na yung mga chromosome, mga ganyan, metaphase chromosome, and essentially magkakaroon ka na ng division, 'di ba? Magkakaroon ka na ng division sa gitna nila. At meron kang mga vesicle dito, mga bilog-bilog na vesicle na may lamang mga fibrillar components or amorphous component, kung ano naman yan. But yeah, mga vesicles yan na in the middle, no, mag-align the middle of your cell plate. And eventually, your these vesicles will form your cell wall. Magiging na siyang ganyan, mag-fuse, magpo-form ng cell wall. And sa cases of your charophytes, meron kang mga plasmodesmata na na-form dito, no? But as you can also see here, yung spindle fiber nagpi-persist yan, along the central area. But eventually, meron kang parang mga holes dito, no? May mga holes ka na matitira dyan, and these are will serve as the connection in between cells. These are your plasmodesmata, will serve as the plasmodesmata. So yeah, again, in the cellular division, you have spindle fibers that will pull the metaphase chromosome towards each other end. And in terms of the formation of your cell wall, we'll have your vesicles that will align at the centers and will deposit materials in the cell wall. And eventually, yung mga spindle fibers will persist, some of it, and plasmodesmata will also form. So that is your pragmoplast. Yung pag sinabi nating pragmoplast, pag maalala nyo, pag sinabi ng teacher nyo na pragmoplast sa 119, sa botany 119, di ba? Yan yung usually nagpo-form na mga plasmodesmata dahil due to the spindle fiber that persist along the division. And ang nangyari, madidissolve yung mga microtubule after nag-persist yung mga spindle fiber na yan, and eventually magkakaroon ng mga holes, yung mga primary pit field, and eventually magpo-form yung mga plasmodesmata. So that's your pragmoplast. In terms of your Ulbopyce naman, they have a persistent spindle fiber, but this time they form what we call cleavage furrow. So para siyang animal na nagdi-divide, nagpo-form ng cleavage furrow. But nagpo-form siya ng cell wall kasi yung mga vesicles mo nagpo-form naman dito sa lugar na ito. Yung mga vesicles yan na nagpo-form. Then eventually madadissect or mababisect yung ating cell. Mga vesicle yan na nagpo-form na ng cell wall. Yan, may mga bilog-bilog. Then magpo-form siya ng completely separate cell. That's your Ulbopyce. Now sa Chloropyce naman, we have what we call the pycoplast na tinatawag. So ano naman sir yung pycoplast? So your pycoplasts are essentially these mga microtubules lang yan. These are microtubules. But these are new sets of, kung isipin nyo, these are microtubules, so para din siyang mga spindle fiber. But this time, these are new set of spindle fiber that forms na perpendicular naman. Ayan, mga spindle fibers na nagpo-form perpendicular dun sa ating cell. So bakit siya ganyan? But ganito yung klase ng division niya, di ba? Essentially, sa una, metaphase chromosome, ipupull ng spindle fiber towards each end of the cell. So, but sa cases ng mga Chloropyce, these spindle fiber will collapse or will get dissolved or mawawala siya. So, yung mga collapsing spindle fiber na to, since na-dissolve sila, will create a certain tension kung saan yung mga nucleus mo pwedeng bumalik dun sa center. So, parang essentially hindi nangyari yung division. But to prevent that, ang gagawin ng cell is it will produce your pycoplast or your spindle fiber na perpendicular. Ayan, na magse-separate dun sa dalawang cell eventually. So, pag na-sense ng cell na nagbabalikan na yung nucleus, nagbabanggaan na sila, magpuproduce siya ng mga pycoplast, ng mga spindle fiber na perpendicular to the cell. Yeah, perpendicular to the cell. And eventually, it will form the pycoplast and it will divide the cell. So kung mapapansin nyo din dito, your organism has what we call tika. So these tika are very rigid, no? Very thick na covering of your cell. And this also restricts the expansion or further elongation of your cell in your Chloropyce. That's why it forms your pycoplast. Di ba? Kasi kapag may spindle fiber ka dyan, it will cause expansion of your cell. Di ba? It will cause expansion. And since hindi nga makapag-expand yung cell, dinidissolve yan, yung mga spindle fiber. But since dinisolve yung spindle fiber, pwedeng magkaroon ng tendency yung nucleus mo na to join, or hindi naman to join, but to go near each other. But to prevent that, kailangan mo mag-form ng pycoplast, ng mga microtubule na perpendicular to separate the two cells entirely, the two daughter cells entirely from each other. Now, I know it's a lot to take in, but we keep on moving because there's no way but to go forward. In terms, pang 7 na basis of classification, in terms of glycolate degradation, pag sinabi nating, again, kung maaalala nyo, pag sinabi nating glycolate, diba? Pag sinabi nating glycolate, may kinalaman yan sa photorespiration. Again, mangyayari lang ang photorespiration kapag mataas ang oxygen, so hindi na si carbon dioxide yung ginagamit or yung nafi-fix dun sa photosynthesis. Si oxygen na nag-i-interfere kasi nga yung enzyme natin na ginagamit ay hindi siya choosy. So, instead na carbon dioxide, oxygen yung nagagamit. So, nag-undergo ng photorespiration kapag mataas ang oxygen or mataas ang temperature. Nag-undergo pag mataas ang temperature, ayaw pa rin. Temperature, yay! So, nag-undergo ng photorespiration. So, may mga adaptation yung ating organism to prevent that glycolate molecule to build up. Kasi, isipin nyo, problema yan. Parang isipin nyo na lang, problema yung presence ng glycolate. Kasi instead na may RUBP ka na magre-react, nag-form ka ng glycolate molecule na hindi ka na nga makaka-extract ng energy. Ba kasi carbon dioxide, pag na-fix mo yan, may energy ka. Hindi ka na nga makakapag-extract ng energy pag binreakdown mo yun, yung carbon dioxide na na-fix mo. Hindi ka na nga hindi ka na nga makaka-extract ng energy dyan. Kailangan mo pang i-breakdown yan using certain enzyme to bring it back to your ribulose 1,5 bisphosphate. So, sa mga charophyte natin, ito yung mga kamag-anak nilang plant, ang ginagamit nila is yung tinatawag nating glycolate oxidase. So, si glycolate, i-act on ng mga glycolate oxidase at gagawin niya yan, parang ibabreak niya yan into your ribulose 1,5 bisphosphate. Okay? But sa case naman ng mga yung Ulbopyceae, Chlorophyceae at yung mga Primnesiophytes natin, no? Yung mga UCP, Ulbopyceae, Chlorophyceae at Prasinophyceae pala. Sorry. Prasinophyceae, ang ginagamit nila is glycolate dehydrogenase. So, much efficient yung usually si glycolate dehydrogenase naman for that. Okay? So, moving on with your urea degradation, meron din tayong pagkakaiba-iba. Ang mga Charophyceae at Ulbopyceae, ang ginagamit nila ay urease to convert urea into other forms of nitrogen, ammonium ions, or for example, ammonia, mga ganyan. Si urease yung ginagamit nila to degrade urea. Sa case naman ng mga Chlorophyceae, ang ginagamit nila is urea amidolase. Amidolase yung ginagamit nila. At mas efficient naman si urease. Mas efficient si urease compared dito sa mga urea amidolase. So that's in terms of urea degradation. In terms of the presence of what we call SOD or your superoxide dismutate, meron tayong iba-ibang klase nito. Kung maalala nyo, meron tayong copper or zinc SOD, copper SOD, zinc SOD, meron din tayong magnesium SOD, at meron din tayong manganese SOD, meron pa tayong FeSOD. But in terms of copper SOD, well, unahin natin kung ano nga bang ginagawa ni SOD or yung superoxide dismutase. Kung maalala nyo, yung ROS, no? Kung maalala nyo si ROS, rules of survival. Hindi, yung ROS or yung reactive oxygen species is usually a problem in most plants, no? Kasi or in most organism that lives in the air. So kasi yung mga reactive oxygen species na yan, nagpo-form ka ng mga tinatawag na iba-ibang mga reactive oxygen species. But essentially what I want you to remember here is meron kang mga free radicals na tinatawag. At yung mga free radicals na to, meron silang very reactive yung mga to kasi meron silang mga free valence electron na pwedeng mag-degrade ng iba't ibang polymers na organic polymers na meron natin, or for example ng DNA din natin. Pwede siya mag-cause ng damage essentially sa enzyme, sa DNA, sa cell, no? So yeah, yun yung effect ng reactive oxygen species, ng free radicals, ng free valence electron ng mato. Very reactive yung mga reactive oxygen species. Kaya reactive oxygen species yung tawag sa nila. But essentially, ang ginagawa ng superoxide dismutase is to convert this reactive oxygen species, this reactive oxygen radical, into a lesser reactive form, which is your hydrogen peroxide plus oxygen right here. So, hydrogen peroxide, mas tolerable siya, mas hindi siya nakakapag-damage ng cell natin. But essentially, toxic pa rin yung hydrogen peroxide na yan. That's why sometimes, di ba kung maalala nyo sa mga bacteria din, these this hydrogen peroxide is still broken down to a more to lesser reactive form. Yeah, yung mga mouthwash nyo, hydrogen peroxide. Pag pumunta kayo sa dentist, yun, yung minumumog nyo muna. Hydrogen peroxide lang yun. But yeah, kino-convert pa yan to lesser form ng iba-ibang mga cell. But hindi na superoxide dismutase yung ginagamit doon. No? Ang pinaka lesser reactive form, water. Ko-convert yan to water and oxygen ng iba pang enzyme. But hindi na yung part ng discussion natin. Si superoxide dismutase lang yun dito. So, nasa cytosol lang yan, yung mga superoxide dismutase na yan. Sa cases ng mga Charophyceae, they are very present and they convert this reactive oxygen into less reactive hydrogen peroxide. But in cases of your Chlorophyceae and Ulvophyceae, they are absent. So, bakit sa tingin nyo, bakit ganun? Bakit ganun, sir? Kasi kung isipin nyo, the charophytes, which are very related to your land plants, and land plants are living in land, no? And your Chlorophyceae and your Ulvophyceae, usually these are aquatic algae species. So, in that sense, no, kapag nasa land ka kasi, no, if you're living or you're exposed sa air, mas mataas yung chance na mas mataas yung oxygen solubility. No, mas mabilis sa yung mag-diffuse si oxygen at kasama na niya yung mga reactive oxygen na meron dyan. So, ibig sabihin yan, pag compare nyo yung air and your water environment, mas mabilis mag-dissolve yung mga reactive oxygen species sa air compared to your aquatic. Kasi 'di ba, pag aquatic environment 'yan, kailangan mo pang i-aerate yung water para mas mataas yung dissolution of oxygen. No? Tapos kung isipin nyo, kung yung O2 radical man na yon ay mag-dissolve sa water, pwede siyang bago pa siya pumunta dun sa cell, pwede nang mag-react, no? Mag-directly react siya dun sa iba't ibang molecules na freely flowing dun sa water mo and other molecule or any other organic molecule na nasa water before pa maapektuhan yung organism. So your land plants and your charophytes is more vulnerable to reactive oxygen species. That's why they are forced to produce this superoxide dismutase in their cytosol to detoxify these oxygen-free radicals. No? Kasi mas subjected yung mga land plants na yan, yung mga charophytes natin, to oxygen-free radicals. Okay. So, pindot. Yan. So, number 10, basis of classification. Moving on, we have your covering on motile cells. In most Chlorophyceae, in most Prasinophyceae, Ulvophyceae, CPU, no? Ayan, CPU. They have what we call your scales, no? Yung cell walls nila, they have scales. The overlapping scale that covers the entirety of your organism. That's your Prasinophyceae, diba? These are the more primitive version of covering of your motile cell. Overlapping plates of cell wall. And essentially, pang protection lang naman yan. But the scales na covering ng motile cells, that's a very primitive. Primitive, no? Anuhan nyo, lagyan nyo ng air quotation yung mga primitive niya kasi bastos yun. No? Anyway, pamubastos yun sa mga organism na to. Buhay pa rin naman sila. So, working. Anyway, yeah. Bio 110 discussion. And yung mga Chlorophyceae naman natin, they have this very thick tika. Parang nag-fuse na tika. Yan yung mga Chlorophyceae natin. Okay? So, yan yung main difference nila in terms of covering of your motile cell. In terms of cellulose terminal complexes, your charophytes has what we call a rosette type of terminal complexes. So when we say rosette, these are circular or rose-like pattern, para siyang pabilog na ganyan. Yung ating mga Chlorophyceae and Ulvophyceae, they have your linear type naman. So, ganyan lang siya. So, parte ng cellulose terminal complexes na to yung gumagawa ng cellulose, no? Yung ating cellulose synthetase. Ayan, no? But in case of the cellulose terminal complexes of your charophytes, they form the rosette type. Your Chlorophyceae and your Ulvophyceae, they form the linear type. Okay, now, moving on to the characteristic. Ito na yung mas exciting na portion kasi we'll get to meet and greet every one of the, most of them, or some of them. Napakadami. So, ilan lang pala yung mamimit and greet natin. But, yeah, of your division Chlorophyta. Okay, so the different representative of your division Chlorophyta. So your chlorophytes includes the majority of your green algae. Kaya pag sinabi natin chlorophyte, matik yan, green algae yung tawag natin. Again, loose clade yung green algae, no? Ang gandang gamitin kasi tamad tayo. Kaya natin ginagamit. Kaya ginagamit ni Sir. Kasi tamad si Sir. Anyway, meron tayo mga aquatic and terrestrial organisms na terrestrial representatives. Mamaya makikita natin kung sino-sino sila. We have at least 4 classes that we'll talk about here. Your Prasinophyceae, your Ulvophyceae, your Chlorophyceae, and your Tribuxophyceae. Again, remember this figure right here. Ulvo, Chloro, Tribuxo, and your Prasinophyceae. So, yan yung pag-uusapan natin in this portion of your division Chlorophyta. So, unahin natin si Prasinophyceae, class Prasinophyceae. This is a very paraphyletic group of organisms including motile coccoid cells, motile coccoid cells that is covered, nabanggit na natin kanina, yung cell wall nila ay may scale overlapping scales. Okay, they usually have 1 to 8 flagella. They are mostly found in marine environment, but there also are freshwater representative. In terms of reproduction, very rare lang naman to, but they form a resistant cyst called your picomata. Yeah. So these are very resistant cysts that can survive a certain environment, extreme condition. And these are exhibited by your Pyramimonadales. Okay, so that's your Prasinophyceae. Tingnan natin kung nasan sila. Sa figure natin, ayan yung mga organism natin. Ayan yung kanilang location. So, zoom in of that. This is your Prasinophytes. Ayan sila. Your Mamiliales, Pyramimonadales, Mastigales. Yeah, yung mga yan, no? So, these are your different groups here under your Prasinophyceae. We have your Mamiliophyceae, Paraminmonadales, your Neprosemidophyceae, your Pycnococcaceae, your Palmopylales. So your Mamilophyceae, these are the larger organisms, no? Larger flagellated organism. Usually they have 1 to 2 flagella. They are coccoid in form. Most of them have scales, but some representative don't has the scale that is classic of your characteristics of your Prasinophyceae. We also have your Pyramimonadales. These are your quadriflagellates. They have 4 flagella. They are very closely related to your Neproselmidophyceae. Yung sister taxa yan, dalawang yan. Your Pycnococcaceae naman, these are the naked coccoids, and these are very small. They have a very small representative. Maliliit lang yung mga very small coccoid organism. They are naked because they don't have scales, unlike most of your Prasinophyceae. And your Palmopylales, these are the deep water representative of your Prasinophyceae. So they have a very well-defined macroscopic thalli, meaning they are large. So let's take a look at them right here. So this is your Ostreococcus, representative of Mammaliales. And this is the smallest eukaryote that I know of. Yeah, smallest eukaryote. Yan si Ostreococcus. And yung largest, di ba, kung maalala nyo naman, yung largest largest eukaryotic cell is si Acetabularia. Yung mga trivia ni sir. Yung una pa yan. No, mamaya makikita din natin sa Acetabularia. Tingnan na natin siya. So, ito naman yung ating para siyang pyramid. Yun yung naalala ko sa kanya. Kaya siguro siya tinawag na Pyramimonas. But these are quadriflagellates. So, apat yung flagella niya dyan. Kung makikita nyo, bilangan nyo 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, they belong to your Praminmonadales. And your B and D, these are your Palmopylum and Verdigellas. These belong to your Pylales. These are the more macroscopic deep water representative of your group Prasinophyceae. Now, moving on to the core UCT group, meaning your Chlorophyceae, your Ulbophyceae, and your Trebuctophyceae. So that's your core UCT or core chlorophyte group. Unahin natin si class Ulvophyceae. So your Ulvophyceae, these are your aquatic. They have aquatic and also terrestrial representatives that live on soil or rocks sometimes, and in tree and leaves, tree barks and leaves. So they have at least 4 main cytomorphological types or morphology, no? Meron tayong mga motile, non-motile unicellular types belonging to your Ulotricales. We have your right here, your filamental or with the blade type of cytomorphology. These are uninucleated cells still. This naman belongs to your Ulvales, your Ulotricales, certain members of Ulotricales, and your Trentepoliales. Again, kung maalala nyo si Trentepoliales, these are the exclusively terrestrial, yung makikita natin dito sa UP Baguio at sa mga tree barks, no? Tingnan nyo yung mga orange na yan. And meron tayong mga Siponocladus type. Oh, ayan. Siponocladus type. So, ayan. Yung mga Siponocladus naman na type, these are the multicellular or multinucleated cells. These are, for example, your organism that belongs to Cladoporales has the Siponocladus type. Multicellular siya at multinucleated. Siponocladus type yung tawag natin doon. But for the case of Siponus type, these are single giant tubular cell. They can either be uninucleated or they can have multinucleated na single giant tubular cell. Okay? Ito yung makikita nyo in certain vigorous streaming representative like your Bryopsidales and your Dasycladales. So isang cell lang yan. Minsan uninucleated yung cell na yon or multinucleated, pero Siponus type yung tawag natin doon. Pag isang cell lang, pag Siponocladus type, multicellular, multinucleated. Okay. Ayan. Okay. So, andito sila. That's your Ulvophyceae. Tingnan natin yung enlargement of that signature. Your Ulvophyceae, ayan sila. This is a very monophyletic grouping. So, si Ulvophyceae ay proven na monophyletic group. And usually, meron kang dalawang main Ulvophyceae clades na nandito. We have your Ulvales Ulotricales. So, asan sila dito? Ayan. So, ito yung isa sa main clade na meron tayo under your Ulvophyceae, Ulvales Ulotricales. And the other one includes your Cladoporales, the Cycladales, your Bryopsidales, and your Trentapoliales. So, ito yung isang clade, ito yung isang clade. So, yan yung main Ulbopycean clade na meron tayo. As again, meron tayong 5 main orders. Tingnan natin isa-isa sila. So, the first order that we'll talk about is number 1, order Ulvales Ulotricales. This is a very diverse clade of organism. Meron kang unicellular to multicellular na mga talus talaga nung makikita mo mga representative. You have still branch or unbranched filament. Minsan mga blade and tubular forms pa rin na makikita. Usually, makikita nyo itong mga to in marine environment, but there are also freshwater and terrestrial representative. You can distinguish your Ulvales and your Urotricales based on their life history. Kasi yung mga Ulvales natin, they have this what we call isomorphic, or they form the alternation of multicellular stages. While your Ulotricales, they are diploid, they produce spore. Meron silang spore producing stage, which is a very small, and they have this what we call thick-walled unicell that is usually attached to substrate and your stalk. Okay, so yun yung pagkakaiba nung dalawang to in terms of na ma-distinguish nyo in terms of life history. Isomorphic alternation ng multicellular stages, ito meron kang diploid na may spore producing at minsan pwede siyang unicell na attach lang sa substrate. That's your Ulotricales. Okay, so ito yung mga example natin. We have your letter A right here, your Enteromorpha clatra and your Enteromorpha intestinalis. And another representative under your magkasamang Ulvales, Ulotricales, di ba? So we have your Ulva lactuca. So Enteromorpha clatra and Enteromorpha intestinalis and your Ulva lactuca. Sila yung mga representative natin. So ganyan, no? Ito ay filament, para siyang filamentus. Ito ay parang may yung Ulva lactuca natin, para siyang may talus na flattened ewan, no? That's your Ulva lactuca. And moving on to number 2, we have your order Cladoporales. Giveaway na pag sinabi mong Cladoporales, Cladopora. Yung mas kilala niya siguro, Cladopora. These are aquatic living. Usually, most representative are aquatic. Makikita nyo to usually sa mga freshwater environment. They are the one that exhibit the Siponocladus type. So, multicellular, multinucleated. That's your Cladopora right here. Ito, branching yung Cladopora natin. But yung Chaetomorpha natin na representative, mga single lang yan. Oh, naging mirror to. Ayan, mga single yan na nag-curl lang. So, hindi siya branching. Yung unbranch yung Chaetomorpha. Unlike your Cladopora na branch na filament. Okay? So, ano pa yung mga itsura ng mga iba pang mga representative under here? Your order Cladoporales. Meron tayong Budleia. Right here, the letter A. We have your Budleia. We have your Valonia, letter C. Yan, para siyang mga circles of watery gelatin. We also have your Burgesenia right here na parang mga sausage, and your Dictyosperia. No? Dictyosperia. Ano man tawag nyo dyan. So, meron tayo nito sa Pilipinas. Lahat yan. Makikita nyo yan sa Parawir. Siguro pumunta kayo sa Parawir, ang daming ganito. At sa La Union, sa Ilocos Norte, Ilocos Sur, yan, meron mga yan. Lahat yan. No? Ang gandang tingnan yan. Tinitikman din namin yan. Medyo maalat na mga algae. Maalat, depende minsan, no? Yung malinis na lang siguro yung tikman nyo. Kasi medyo matubig na seawater lang yung iba dyan. Kaya maalat siguro. But yeah, no? I suggest you try eating this algae. Pero wag nyong ingest. So hindi pala eating. Tikman nyo lang. Nguyang-nguyain nyo lang para matikman nyo. Tapos durahin nyo agad para hindi kayo malasa. Baka kasi, or magkasakit sa tiyan. Anyway, moving on with the number 3, we have your order Bryopsidales. Sa order Bryopsidales, aka ang tawag din namin sa kanila ay yung mga Caulerpales, Codiales, Siponales. No? Ito yung nagfo-form ng mga Siponus type, uh, unicellular, multinucleated, uninucleated, yung mga organism na to. They are majorly found on coral reefs, your lagoons, and seagrass bed, and they are the major primary producers in that certain area. Ito yung mga kinakain ng mga sea urchin, ng mga grazers ng coral reefs natin. And yeah, meron tayong mga freshwater species din, including your Dichotomosipon right here. Oh, yan, naglalag tayo. Hintayin lang natin. Dichotomosipon. Yung morphology nila, that's very simple. We have very simple types and meron tayong mga branch sipon to complex na malalaking talus. Okay, so tingnan natin kung anong itsura ng mga ito. So ayan, so we have different representative. Letter A, your codium. Hindi ko alam kung na-mention sa SpongeBob to, pero may mga codium doon. Codium edule. Makita nyo siguro sa mga press specimen natin, yung mga picture natin sa laboratory. Yan, si codium ay belonging to your Bryopsidales. We have your Halimeda opuntia or Halimeda, yung mga Halimeda species, mga ganyan. Meron tayong Halimeda opuntia, yung malalaki naman na version, that's your Halimeda macroloba. Minsan meron ka pang makikitang high degree of calcification dun sa base ng mga to. At meron tayo, like here, your Udotea. Ang description namin dito, para siyang walis. Ay, ang galing. Parang walis to. Ay, hindi nyo siguro makita dito, pero pag ano nyo na yan, para siyang walis or fan, no? Na yung itsura niya. And of course, yung mas kilala siguro natin ng mga tao, yung mga Caulerpa, Taxifolia, Caulerpa, Microphysa. Itong mga to, yung ararosit, yung kinakain natin ng mga Caulerpa species na seaweed na fina-farm at kinakain ng mga tao sa dalampasigan. Sarap yan, no? Sama nyo sa kamatis at itlog na maalat. Yep. Now, moving on with the order, the Cycladales. This is the fourth one, if I'm not mistaken. So, yep, fourth one. Most of your order, the Cycladales are marine tropical algae. So, sa maiinit na marine na lugar lang siya makikita, karamihan. They have a talus that are usually radially symmetrical. And sometimes meron kang high degree of encrusting, calcium carbonate deposition, lalo na sa mga babang portion ng mga organism na to. They have an erect axis that usually bears branches. Historically, yung order ng Cycladales, they are the most diverse order na naaral ng mga phycologists natin. So, tingnan natin yung mga representative na meron tayo. We have your Acetabularia. This is the largest unicellular eukaryote that we have. So, ayan, isang cell lang yan, buong yan. That's your Acetabularia. So, meron kang rhizoid, then nucleus, yan yung nucleus mo. And then, meron kang stalk, apex, may iba't ibang kang whorls of hairs and scar. And we have your wine glass right here, the cap. Ayan, nagpo-form siya ng mga cysts and so on. So, mga gametes, mga ganyan, na nag-grow into a new individual. So, that's your Acetabularia. Unique na unique yung tsura niya. We also have your Bornetella right here. So your Bornetella right here are forms. Ano ba yan? Your Bornetella right here forms your erect central rays. No? Para siyang isang central rays na tumataas na paganyan. So that's your Bornetella. We also have your cigarette. Cigarette smoking is dangerous for your health. So, mukha talaga siyang cigarette pero green. No? Anyway, so cigarette butt. Parang ganun. Kasi meron kang white portion dito na due to deposition of calcium carbonate. Kaya siya nagmumukhang sigarilyo. So that's your Neomeris naman. No, hindi siya talaga sigarilyo. Huwag niyo siyang hit-hitin sa field. Meron ako nung nakita nito. Siguro baka pagpunta kayo sa ang tawag dito. Ano bang lugar yun? Sa Ilocos Sur, sa mga dagat doon. Namutan ko. Ilocos Norte pala, sorry. Pagudpud, yun. Nalimutan ko na yung Pagudpud. Ang ganda-ganda pa naman. Yan. Makikita nyo talaga itong mga neomeris na to sa bandang dalampasigan. So, maghanap kayo ng bato. Pag may nakahanap kayong malaking bato, dun sila magtatago. Kahit malakas kasi yung alon, okay lang, buhay yung mga yan. No? So, mayroon kang bato, maghanap ka dun sa mga bato, dun usually sila nakadikit, yung mga neomeris na yan. No? Kaya din sila hindi agad na wash away dahil dyan sa matitigas kasi itong mga to. No? Meron ka talagang kumakapit na talagang made up of calcium deposition. Parang siyang coral, no? In a way. Anyway, yeah, makikita nyo sila sa mga bato-bato. And moving on with the last portion of our lecture of today. Ala, hindi na nag-respond. Ayan. So moving on to the last lecture of our moving on to the last representative under your class Ulvopaceae, we have your order Trentepoliales. Your Trentepoliales are exclusively terrestrial. They have sporangial production. Again, ito yung sa UPB. Hanapin nyo lang yung pag face-to-face na, hanapin nyo yung parang signage dyan sa Court A. Yan, makikita nyo yung mga orange or to yellow Trentepoliales na Trentipolia na nandyan, kulay orange. Nakadikit sa mga puno, sa mga bato-bato. And we'll now move on. So, tapos na tayo kay Ulvopaceae. Punta na tayo kay class Chlorophyta. So, sa class Chlorophyta naman, yung mga representative natin are non-motile to motile. They have representative non-motile unicells. So, very diverse din yung itsura nila. Meron kang nagpo-form ng colonies, meron kang mga unicells, meron kang branch at unbranched ng filaments, meron kang mga parang dahon na talus yung itsura. These are usually, your chlorophytes are very abundant in fresh water, but there are also few representative in terrestrial environment. We have 5 major clades na pag-uusapan dito, so tingnan natin sila. Itsura nila, ito sila, again, an enlargement of of that is right here. So, ayan yung ating mga Chlorophytae. So, yeah, kaya siya chlorophytes dahil kay Chlorophytae. Hindi, no? Pero yun, no? Mas parang sila yung center point ng chlorophytes natin. Si Chlorophytae. Kasi, just think of the name, diba? But, as you can see here, we have 5 representatives na group. We have your Chlamydomonadales. That's your Chlamydomonas. Diyan siya nabibilang. So, siya yung mukhang ganyan. Ay, ang galing. Ano na yan? Ano ba? Chlamydomonas, yung may dalawang flagella. Yung pinag-uusapan natin kanina pa. So, this is the largest group na composed of non-motile to motile unicells na usually merong 2 to 4 na flagella. Meron tayo na na under your Spiropleiales. These are mga representative natin yung Microspora or yung mga Pediastrum. Nako, ito na naman. Pediastrum. Ayan. Nay. Kaya mo yan, sir. Nawala pa yung S ko. Pediastrum. Yay! Pediastrum. So, Microspora and Pediastrum, these are non-motile cells na usually nagpo-form ng colonies. Meron din ng mga biflagellated zoospore yung mga Pediastrum natin, Microspora. Under your Chaetoporales, ito yung mga Chaetopora, and yung ating Euronema. Makikita natin yung tsura nila mamaya. Euronema na unbranched and yung branch na Chaetopora. These are quadriflagellated motile cells. Meron din tayo sa case ng Chaetopeltidales. These are quadriflagellated motile cells ulit. But they have a disc-like talus na katulad dun sa mga case ng Chaetopeltis. Makikita natin mamaya yung itsura nila. Para siyang disc-like. And we have your Odogonium, syempre. So, si Odogonium is Stepanocont, bears a Stepanocont na zoospore. So, Stepanoconta, ito ata, kung maalala nyo yung merong na zoospore. Ayan. Anyway, moving on to the different representative here. So we have your Chlamydomonas. Part siya nung Chlamydomonadales. So sa para siya yung, anong tawag doon? Type taxa, no? Kasi parang siya na nakuha sa kanya yung pangalan. So yeah, makita nyo, meron siya dyang stigma pero hindi dito, ay, naglalag na ako. Hindi dito kita. So dalawang flagella, that's your Chlamydomonas. Which is a motile flagellated cell. We have your volvox here. Ayan, volvox na nagpo-form ng colony. Meron tayong Euronema right here and your Chaetopora na yung Euronema, ito, syempre hindi ito branching, unbranched, no? Ito yung kanyang flagellated na cell, pero this is the unbranched one. Ito yung case ng Chaetopora naman na meron kang branching pattern. Okay? Now, your, ito naman si E. So, yan naman si E. Meron kang parang disc-like na talus. So, this is your Chaetopeltis. And this one naman, makikita mo yung gamitangium ni Odigonium na meron kang darkened na stained na cell dyan sa loob niya. Ay, may nawala. But yeah, that's the gamitangium of your Odigonium. Now, moving on to the next portion or the last portion of our lecture for today. Ayan, punta na tayo dun sa last class, which is your Chlorophyta. Ay, hindi pa pala siya last, no? Second to the last. So, kasi wala pa tayo kay Charophyceae. So, UCT core group pa rin to, si Treboxyphyceae. Originally, they are part of the group that we call Plurastophyceae. But ngayon, a class Treboxyphyceae na ang tawag sa kanya. Plurastophyceae. They have different morphological representatives. We have motile to non-motile unicellular representative to colonial representative. We also have multicellular filamentous to blade-like representative. And meron kang mga freshwater and terrestrial, but there are also some brackish and marine representative of your Treboxyphyceae. Now, these group also form symbiosis, both extracellular and intracellular, dahil yung ibang mga representative of your Treboxyphyceae are the pycobiont of your, lichens, yes, under the Treboxyphyceae. Yung kalimitan sa mga pycobiont ng mga lichen groups na meron tayo dito sa Baguio. Ayun, nga pala, kung gusto nyo makita din yung mga different lichens at meron tayong mga estudyante na nagtitesis dyan sa lichens na yan, pwede kayong mag-micro-thesis ng mga lichens, baka gusto nyo magawa. So, meron tayo dito mga collection din ng mga lichens na curate namin at nandyan lang yan. Tanungin nyo lang si Manang A or yung future siguro na instructor ng Bio 102 ng PyCol. Meron tayong mga press specimen yan, pati ng mga lichens, hindi lang ng mga algae, lichens them dun sa ating sa mga stockpile natin. So yun, pinaplastic-plastic ko yung mga yan para makita ng mga estudyante kapag bumalik na ang face-to-face. Sana, first sem, nandito na kayo. Ayan. So, nasa na tayo? Ang dami kasing kwento. Ayan, ito yung ating Treboxyphyceae. Again, part of the UCT core group of your chlorophytes. UCT core group. Ayan, i-enlarge natin. We have your different groups. We have your Chlorellales. We have your Treboxiales and Microtamniales and your Prasiola grade. So, yung ating Chlorellales is majority ay freshwater, although there are terrestrial to marine representative too. These are the coccoid, and usually ito ay mga non-photosynthetic na mga type. Ito na yung kaninang nabanggit natin, si Prototika, na parasitic na yung kanyang mode of nutrition. Yung mga Treboxiales naman natin, this is also known as the lichen algae group. So, mga example natin dyan is si Treboxia. Meron din naman tayong mga Treboxiales na free-living soil algae. So, hindi lang mga bacteria, hindi lang mga, ang tawag dito, Hindi lang bacteria, hindi lang fungi ang meron sa soil. Meron ding microalgae. Meron ding mga diatoms, makikita nyo. Sa soil, sa soil yan. Nabubuhay yung mga yan. So, but yeah, kaya ang gandang mga i-research din yung metagenomic analysis ng soil. Kasi napaka-diverse. Tapos kasi mahirap i-culture tong mga to. No? Iba-ibang isipin nyo, iba-ibang organism, iba-ibang gustong nutrition, yung iba sa propitic, yung iba photosynthetic, yung iba may parasitic mode, mga ganyan. So magandang mag-ano talaga, no? Kumuha ka ng soil, metagenomic analysis, extract mo yung DNA, gumamit ka ng mga primers para sa iba't ibang klase ng organism, i-run mo, mas madami ka pa siya, madami yung ano, magandang mag-train doon. Madami pang processing, post-processing, clipping, pag-interpret ng mga sequences data mo, and eventually, yeah, meron kang metagenomic study. Parang gano'n, no? Parang dali lang pero napakahirap gawin niya. But yeah, yung free-living soil algae natin dito sa Treboxiales is your Mimertia. So, Mimertia, pag sinabi nating Myrmodipun, yung Myrme, di ba para siyang Greek goddess? Kung maalala niyo pa si Myrme. Anyway, si Microtubular naman, these are the branch filamentous coccoid form. Ang mga representative nito is si Microtamnion. Yeah, Microtamnion. Palitan mo lang ng neon yung dulo. So that's your Microtamniales. Yung Prasiola clade would include your Pabia genus. But yeah, that's your Treboxyophyceae. Siguro key takeaway dito, Treboxyophyceae, lichen algae group. Treboxyales, no? Ang ano natin. Yun lang yung inalala natin sa Treboxyophyceae. Now, moving on with the next division, Streptophyta. Although hindi natin babanggitin na yung land plants, hindi na natin sila babanggitin, yung charophytes lang natin yung kailangang aralin. So this is the last portion of our class for today. We will now thinking about you. Thinking about me, thinking about you. May kantang ganun. Anyway, daming kwento. Thinking of me, thinking of you. So yeah, class Charo Pisces. Ito yung ng chat si Manang Charo. Maalala mo kaya? Anyway, Charotera tong Charo Pisces na to. Your Charo Pisces is the most this is a paraphyletic assemblage, and usually kamag-anak nito, this very close semblance dun sa ating mga land plants. Their morphology range from being unicellular to being multicellular. They occupy freshwater to terrestrial habitat kasi nga kamag-anak nila yung land plant. No, konting step na lang land plant na kasi sila. They have motile cells na merong 2 subapical flagella. 2 subapical flagella. At usually may dalawang class lang tayo dito na pag-uusapan. That's your Zygnematophyceae. Zygnematophyceae. And your God, ano ba? Ba nagiging O yung sila yung sinusulat ko nagiging O. Charo. So, Charophyceae and your Zygnematophyceae. So, tingnan natin yung itsura ng mga ito. Ayan. So, ito tayo. Enlarge natin yan. Enlarge natin. So, ayan. You have your Zygnematophyceae and your Charophyceae. Tapos, andyan din yung ating land plants na dito. Yung iba, wag nyo na masyadong pansinin. Okay? Now, ang pag-usapan lang natin is si Zygnematophyceae at si Charophyceae. So, yung Zygnematophyceae natin, these are your conjugating green algae. This conjugating green algae is the most species-rich that produce non-motile gametes na representative. Your Charophyceae are also known as your Stoneworts. So, kasi para silang plant na nasa stone. No? So those are your stoneworts. These are large macroscopic algae with plant-like appearance. So ganito yung mga itsura talaga yung mga so, parang ganyan. Ayan, tapos may ganyan-ganyan. Ganyan-ganyan itsura ng mga charophytes natin. Ito yung makikita nyong pinag-aaralan na first dapat, no? sa Botany 119 nyo. Siguro sa Botany 109 nyo din. But that's your Stoneworts. They have a large macroscopic, these are the large microscopic with plant-like appearances. Ang growth nila is usually they have a single meristematic cell na nagmumultiply. They have a central stalk na ganyan, central stalk. Ito yung central stalk nila. This central stalk is large and elongated and usually multinucleated yan. They have branches too na uninucleated. They have, yun din ang pinaka saan nila. So kung yan yung Choropiceae natin, so meron kang ganyan, no? Tapos yan, may ganyan siya, di ba? Yung meron ka din dun sa mga branches na yan, para kang may flower. Kung para kang meron kang sheet na ganun. So para kang may ganyan na nandun near the branch, no? These are your reproductive structure na. Meron ka diyang oogonia and antheridia. So para siyang flower, no? These are sex cells, parang mga sex cells or reproductive structure. That is yung mga ating oogonia and antheridia na yan, di ba? Sa land plants, di ba? Sa mga flowering plants natin. These are usually surrounded by sterile cells. At ganun din yung itsura sa kanila. Para silang may flower na, pero hindi talaga siya considered as flower. But yeah, they have oogonia and antheridia that is surrounded by a sterile cell. And meron ka pang mga zygote with sporopollenin. So yung mga sporopollenin na yan, ayun sabi niyo dyan, yung mga sporopollenin na yan, nakita nila sa mga fossilized spore. Pag fossilized na yung spore na yan, ang tawag na natin dyan ay gyrogonites. These are your fossilized spore na nakita nila kahit sa mga extinct representative ng ating Choropiceae. Choropiceae. So, yeah. And that's your Chorophytes. Hindi ko napapakita yung mga itsura nila kasi very basic yung itsura niya mga yan. No? Mukha silang plant-like talaga. But yes, i-search natin. So yeah, this is the one that I was talking about. Ito yung mga Choropiceae natin. Ayan. So ito yung mga Stoneworts. So ito yung sinasabi ko sa inyo. Mukha talaga silang, terrestrial sila to semi-terrestrial aquatic na mga organism yan. So ayan yung sinasabi ko sa inyo. Meron kang yung ating antheridia or oogonia na surrounded with sterile cells. Para siyang may flower din. Magandang exercise to sa Botany 119 nyo or Botany 109 bago kayo mag-jump sa mga land plants kasi sila yung parang mga primitive land plants, no? Relatives ng land plants natin. But anyway, yeah, that's all for your division Chlorophyta, your Chlorophytes. Maraming salamat sa pag-stay sa ating lecture for today. And if you have question, just chat me or message me through the Gmail and our VLE course site. And kung wala na kayong katanungan, yun lang tayo for today. Maraming salamat. This is Sir Patrick. Peace out.